Wildman.
Sorry, Neil.
Wildman, W-I-L-E-M-A-N.
That microphone's not quite picking you up.
I call Neil Wildman.
One of their complainants is called in sick.
Do you take an oath on the Bible or an affirmation?
Bible, thanks.
Bible? There's a Bible there. Would you take it in your hand, please, and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
the evidence that I shall give in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Take a seat, please. Yes, Ms. Finnis.
Thank you, Your Honour. Would you tell the Royal Commission your full name?
Neil Brendan Wildman.
Mr Wildman, you made a statement the 23rd of April this year.
That's right.
You don't have a copy of it with you?
Not with me, no.
We'll give you a copy. I'll just clip it together for you so it's easier. The contents of that statement, Mr Wildman, are true and correct?
Yes.
I tender the statement.
It'll be Exhibit 2812.
I invite you, Mr Wildman, to read your statement.
Yes, okay.
And if you'd like me to take over at any stage, happy to do so.
Okay. Now, this statement made by me accurately sets out the evidence that I am prepared to give to the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. The statement is true and correct to the best of my knowledge and belief. My full name is Neil Brendan Wildman. I am 55 years old. I was born in North Melbourne and live with my mum, dad and two younger sisters. I started primary school when I was 4 years old. I started at Broad Meadows Primary School. About 2 years later, my parents moved to Frankston and I moved to a Catholic school nearby. About 2 years after starting at the Frankston school, my parents divorced. My father won custody of the children, so my two sisters and I resided with him in Melbourne. My mother had issues with alcohol and was living somewhere in St Kilda, Melbourne at the time. I went to St Francis Xavier's College in Ballarat for half of Year 5 and Year 6 in 1972. At the age of 11, I started at St Patrick's College, Ballarat. My father was a sales representative and was regularly travelling overseas for work. He was unable to look after us while he was away, so I was sent to full-time boarding school. My two sisters were both at Sacred Heart College. That's incorrect, Ballarat, a girls' boarding school. My father thought I would get a good education out of Ballarat Catholic School. As a boarding student at both St Francis and St Patrick's, I resided in a dormitory that was located on the school grounds. The dormitory was a big room with rows of beds where all the kids slept. For each dormitory, there was a dormitory master. He lived in a cubicle with no roof at the end of the dormitory. The dormitory master was responsible for the welfare of the kids, ensuring they got ready for school each day, ate their meals, did their homework, and was also responsible for discipline. When I started at St Patrick's in 1972, the dormitory master in my house was Brother Ring. During the year, either late 1972 or early 73, Brother Ring went on retreat when he was absent from the school for a while. When Brother Ring was away, Brother Dowland took over as the dormitory master. Dowland was also a teacher at the school. Initially, I enjoyed boarding school. I made some good friends and really enjoyed the sport. I was doing well academically, passing all of my subjects. There was a close bond between the boarding students because there was only about 20 boys in my dormitory. In the early part of 1973, I turned 12 years old. I remember it was a school day about 4:30 in the afternoon, just before tea. I'd walked back from class to the dormitory. There was no one else at the dormitory, and I was on my way to the toilet when Dowland signalled to me from his cubicle at the end of the dormitory and said, "Come here." I was about 10 metres away from him. I walked towards him and he said, "Come closer." I moved very close to him. Dowland then leaned over, with his head close to me and smelt my breath. He said, "Have you been smoking cigarettes?" I said, "Yes, sir." Dallin then hit me across the head twice with an open hand. The force of him hitting me caused me to fall to my knees on the ground. Dallin took out his keys, unlocked the door to his cubicle and said to me, "Come in." Once inside his room, Dallin hit me a couple of more times across the head with an open hand and I fell to the floor again. He told me to stand up, then he started rubbing my penis on the outside of my clothes. Dallin then unzipped my pants, put his hand inside my zipper and touched my penis directly. I think he was trying to get me aroused by holding and rubbing my penis. I felt sick and disgusted by what Dallin was doing. I was too scared to move away from him or try to stop him, as he had already hit me several times across the head and I did not want to get hit again. Dallin continued to sexually abuse me for several minutes. He then zipped up my pants and told me to go. He did not say anything else at the time, and I did not tell anybody, as I was scared of what would happen to me, and I was embarrassed and disgusted by what had happened. Dallin continued to sexually abuse me, and the incidents occurred either in Dallin's cubicle or in the back of the classroom when we did our evening classes at 7:30 p.m. The evening classes were held for us to do our homework. The classroom contained all the boarders from my school year. Often there would be other people nearby, and Dallin seemed a bit rushed, often just touching me on the penis. When Dallin was abusing me at the back of the classroom, it was done when the other boys would have been able to see if they turned around. They knew not to turn around, or they would have cops and physical abuse. There was one other boarding student that I knew this happened to as well. He and I discussed the sexual abuse we were suffering at the hands of Dallin. On one occasion, about the fourth time Dallin sexually abused me, we were in his cubicle in the dormitory. I think it was an afternoon after class or on a weekend. It was a couple of weeks after the first time Dallin abused me, and I was in his cubicle because Dallin suspected me of smoking again. He hit me several times across the head with an open hand and said something to me about smoking, but I can't recall what he said. Dallin then started rubbing my penis through my clothes again, proceeding to unzip my pants and put his hand inside my clothes, touching my penis. He then pulled my pants down and started sucking my penis. I did not get an erection and I felt dirty, frightened and cold. After about 10 minutes he pulled my pants up, hit me a few more times across the head and sent me away. During the abuse he did not say anything to me. Dallin sexually and physically abused me approximately 2 or 3 times a week for about 12 months. I was often at the school on weekends and during school holidays when a lot of the other boys had gone home. There were not many people around at these times and it was easy for Dallin to find opportunities to abuse me. The abuse consisted of Dallin touching me or sucking my penis. He did not expose himself to me and did not ask me to touch him. When Dallin first began abusing me, I put up with it because the sexual abuse usually meant less physical abuse. Dallin was regularly hitting me with his favourite method, being to hit me across the head with an open hand. The sexual abuse seemed like a better option at the time. But once Dallin began performing oral sex on me, I couldn't take it anymore. About September or October 1973, I ran away from school. I went to my dad's place in North Melbourne and told him the brothers at the school were hurting me. I didn't tell him I was being sexually abused because I was ashamed and embarrassed about it. I was also really confused at this time because I'd always believed that sex only took place between a man and a woman. Dad told me that he had spoken to the headmaster at St Patrick's, Brother Nangle. Dad said if they do it again, report it to Brother Nangle. The next day, Dad took me back to St Pat's. When I got back to St Pat's, Dallin continued to sexually abuse me. I approached Brother Nangle, like my father told me, and told him that Dallin was hurting me. I was not able to tell him about the sexual abuse at the time. Nangle said that he would talk to Dallin. A short time later, Dallin approached me at school and called me a dobber. I was punished for complaining, but it did not stop the abuse. In fact, it made Dallin more aggressive. I didn't complain to anyone at school again. When I spoke to Nangle, he didn't seem shocked at all. He was very businesslike about it. Whilst I didn't tell him about the sexual abuse, he asked no questions to find out exactly what was going on. Had he been more sympathetic and nurturing, I may have opened up to him about the abuse. The sexual abuse by Dowling continued until I left the school. In 1973, when I was in Form 2, Brother Ring returned to the school after several months away on retreat. When he returned, he did not go back to being the dormitory master, but was a maths and science teacher and music teacher. Very soon after returning to the school, Ring began to sexually abusing me. After school, the boys had to shower in the dormitory. Ring would come and stand around the shower and locker room watching the boys shower. After my shower, Ring would come up to me and fondle my genitals in the locker room. There were often other boys around the area, but not in the immediate vicinity. Ring also abused me in the music room. After dinner, students were able to ask permission to go to the music room to practice. This was a chance to go and practice music on my own. Sometimes Ring would come to the music room when I was there and abuse me in the music room. Ring sexually abused me about 12 times in total. He continued to abuse me until I ran away from the school for good. I don't understand why this has been blacked out.
You can just read around the black dart.
Yeah, but I still don't understand why his name's been left out.
The Royal Commission is required to do its work in such a way that doesn't impede or prejudice current or future ongoing criminal proceedings and civil proceedings. So any name that's been redacted has been redacted in order to satisfy that. Do you understand?
No, I don't. This man's passed away, so it's obviously no upcoming criminal proceedings outstanding.
I suspect that we have found that he's not passed away, Mr. Wildman.
Okay.
Do we know?
Well, yes, we know he's not passed away.
Very well. If
Okay.
we know,
So I thought he passed
no, that's
away.
all right. If we know that,
Just wishful thinking.
if we know that, well, that's
Okay. Brother.
That's the reason, you understand.
Right, okay. Brother was also a teacher at St Patrick's. I can't recall exactly what he taught. He was very physically abusive. He would regularly hit students across the head with an open hand for minor misdemeanours. Brother also sexually abused me during the same period as both Dowling and Ring were abusing me. He assaulted me about 3 or 4 times whilst I was at St Patrick's. He would somehow get me alone in a classroom and would touch me on the outside of my clothes. I continued to run away from school. On one occasion in 1973, I went to Dad's place and told him the brothers were still hurting me. I still did not tell him about the sexual abuse because of my shame and embarrassment. Dad was not travelling as much at this time. Dad allowed me to stay with him and I started attending St Mary's School in North Melbourne. I stayed with Dad for the rest of 1973 and for a few months at the start of 1974. During this time, I got myself into some trouble with the police and I ended up before the Children's Court. After the court matter was finished, I was sent back to St Pat's as a boarding student again. I was told that I would be made a ward of the state if I did not return to boarding school. When I went back to St Patrick's, I continued to be sexually abused by Dowling, Ring, and once I turned 13 years old, I was able to stand up for myself a bit more. I became more defiant. I wasn't as scared of them as I was when I was 12. I ran away again, and this time the school expelled me and I was not allowed to return. By this time, Dad had remarried and was living in Albert Park. I went to live with him and I attended Albert Park High School. I left school when I was 15 years old. I never told Nangle about the sexual abuse by Ring because when I told him about Dowling, nothing improved. In fact, Dowling had become worse. I did not want to suffer any more than I currently was, so I kept quiet. The first people I told about my sexual abuse was the mates from school. They had not been abused themselves. They were very supportive. I was about 20 years old at the time. I was closer to my mum than my dad, and also around the age of 20 I told her about the abuse I had suffered. She was very angry about what had happened to me. She was also supportive. I first mentioned the sexual abuse I had suffered to my father when I was 20 years old. I told him what had been done to me and how upset I was by it. Dad believed me when I told him, but his response was essentially, there is not much you can do about it now, except try to move on. I was working as a laboratory technician, and one day during a break at work, I opened up the Herald Sun newspaper. There was a report in relation to sexual abuse at St Olympia's School in Ballarat. On page 2 of the paper, there was a silhouette picture of Dowland. I recognised him straight away from the shape of his head. According to the news report, Dowland moved from St Olympia's School to St Pat's School. Dowland had been charged with child sex offences. Seeing this news report inspired me to report the abuse I had suffered to the police. On the 30th of October 1996, I attended Newport Police Station and reported the abuse I had suffered. I provided a signed statement to the police. At the time that I reported to the police, I believed that Dowland would be charged with offences perpetrated against me. Dowland was not charged in relation to offences against me, but I don't know why. I thought what happened to me would be dealt with concurrently with other charges. I had also reported to the abuse by ring and to the police, but the police told me that they had both died. So there was no way to proceed with charges. They were able to get away with abusing kids without any punishment at all. About 2 years ago in 2013, I was approached by a police officer from Task Force Sano. He told me the police were revisiting Dowland and were looking at charging him with the offences he committed against me. He asked me, would you be on board or not? I replied yes. The matter proceeded for both my charges and charges relating to 19 other boys who had been abused by Dowland. Dowland pleaded guilty to a number of charges. I provided a victim impact statement but did not read the statement to the court. Dowland was convicted and sentenced to a total of 6 years in prison with a non-parole period of 3 years. I believe the DPP are currently appealing the sentence. I was very disappointed with the sentence. I would expect this sort of sentence for someone who committed burglaries, not someone who had abused 20 boys over an extended period of time and ruined so many lives. About 2001, a friend in Broken Rights told me about civil litigation. I had 5 years to make a claim from when I reported it to police in 1996. I had a family court matter at the time when I was fighting to get access to my own kids. My ex-wife's lawyer said I was using child abuse as an excuse for drinking and I wasn't fit to have access to my 2 sons. This was the catalyst for me to seek compensation so I could prove I was not lying about the abuse. I got on a train to Frankston the next day. I approached the solicitor David Forster, who had been recommended by Broken Rights. Shortly after meeting with Forster, I attended a mediation session. I think the mediation was in 2002. I remember that a senior member of the Christian Brothers was at the mediation, but can't recall his name. I sat in a room with Forster while a mediator went between me and the Christian Brothers with offers. An offer was made for $75,000. Forster thought this was about as much as I could get, so he advised that I should take it. I agreed to settle for that amount. It wasn't about the money, it was about credibility. Out of the $75,000, I had to pay $25,000 to solicitors for costs. I think the church should have agreed to pay my costs. The senior member of the Christian Brothers apologised to me for what had happened and invited me back to the church. I refused, but felt somewhat vindicated. I didn't feel that the apology that was offered was sincere, and it didn't mean anything to me. I have a juvenile criminal record. I was angry at what had happened to me as a child, and I thought to myself, well, if you can break the law, I can also break the law. Mostly my behaviour involved theft and property damage. I spent time in a number of juvenile detention centres. I moved out of home at a relatively young age and have always struggled to get work. I do have a Certificate 3 in fitness. I'm a qualified personal trainer. I also have a Diploma of Applied Science in Chemistry from the University of Victoria. While I have these qualifications, I feel that the abuse has stopped me from realising my potential and making the most of my skills. I've always suffered from low self-esteem, which does not go away. I suffer from depression, have been on antidepressant, antipsychotic and sleeping medication. I have abused alcohol and made several suicide attempts. I'm currently taking antipsychotic medication. The abuse has greatly disrupted my family life. All of my relationships with family have been ruined. I've had difficulty forming relationships. Both of my sisters have passed away. My mum passed away a couple of years ago. We had a good relationship and I looked after her before she died. My father is currently living in Thailand. My ex-wife has been successful in preventing me having a relationship with my sons. They are currently 29 and 22 years old. I do not see them. Approximately 3 or 4 of my close friends have committed suicide. One of my school friends who committed suicide when I was about 18 particularly upset me. This friend found out about the rape of his brother and went and physically assaulted Darwin. He then drove him to the bush and hooked a hose up to his car. What a waste of life. He committed suicide when I was about 18. I didn't even learn about it until later. He wasn't even abused himself. His little brother was raped by Darwin and he just couldn't deal with it. It makes me furious. It was a death. He didn't even. I would like to see a on the needs of victims they need. There's a huge suicide rate in victims at Ballarat, and part of the problem is that victims just don't feel like they can trust anyone. I tried, but I was either not believed or didn't care. Those responsible for covering up the abuse are almost as much to blame for what has happened as those who committed the abuse. Emphasis on protecting the reputation of institutions like the Catholic Church and not enough emphasis on protecting children.
Alman, I understand that you wish to make a few.
I just want to say something, something that happened since I gave this evidence. I would like to, in addition to my statement that has happened to me, since providing my statement to the Royal Commission. My sister recently told me that she doesn't want me to be around my 5-year-old nephew. She told me that this was because I recently read an article that said that those that had been sexually in the past would go on to be abusers themselves. As a result, I am not allowed to have any contact with my nephew, and I no longer have any contact with my sister. I do not know what article it is that she read, but I believe it's a commonly held opinion. You just have to go onto the internet. This offended and hurt me significantly. As a victim of sexual abuse, I'm even more sensitive to protecting children. I want the Royal Commission to find that this thinking of the abused becoming abuser is totally wrong. As survivors, we have enough to deal with without this further victimisation.
Does anyone, just a second, Mr. Wildman. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Wildman? No. Now, Mr. Wildman, you may leave the witness box. And thank you. You are excused.
Your Honour, might I indicate that Associate Professor Carolyn Quadrio is giving evidence next week, and one of the aspects of her evidence will be the matter raised by Mr. Wildman. That is what academic literature there is available in respect of abusers having been abused. I call Timothy Green.
Mr. Green, will you take an oath from the Bible or an affirmation? Affirmation. Would you repeat after me? I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that
the evidence I shall give to this Royal Commission
the evidence that I give to this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
Yes, thank you. Take a seat.
Would you tell the Royal Commission your full name?
Timothy Andrew Green.
Mr Green, you provided a statement to the Royal Commission dated the 22nd of April this year.
Correct.
You have a copy of that with you?
Yes, I do.
Are the contents of that true and correct?
Yes, they are.
The Exhibit 2813.
I invite you to read the statement, Mr Green.
This statement made by me accurately sets out the evidence that I am prepared to give to the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. The statement is true and correct to the best of my knowledge and belief. My full name is Timothy Andrew Green. I was born in 1961. I am currently 53 years old. I was born and raised in Ballarat with my mum, dad and my older brother. My parents were not strong Catholics, but we considered ourselves church-going Catholics. We used to go to Mass every Sunday. In 1966, when I was 4 years old, I started school at St Francis Xavier College, Villa Maria, which was a school run by the Sisters of Mercy nuns. As a child, I was sexually abused by a person I came into regular contact with. He was 4 years older than me. I was abused by him on a regular basis. I would say on every occasion that I saw him, which was fortnightly. I'm not sure when it started, but I don't remember it not happening to me. He abused me until I left Ballarat to go to university in 1979. This person was a student at St Olympia's Primary School, and one of his teachers was Brother Robert Best.
Mr Green, can you just move that microphone a little closer again? Thank you.
In 1973, I commenced high school at St Patrick's College, Ballarat, as a day student. I was 11 years old when I started, and I was the youngest student in my year. Brother Edward Dowland was my teacher for many subjects, including maths, English and religious studies. The headmaster of the school at the time was Brother Paul Nangle. On one occasion during 4-1, my whole class was invited to a sleepover at a fellow student's home. We camped out in the yard. Brother Dowland was at the sleepover. Dowland was the only adult that was present at the sleepover. I recall that Neil Diamond's album Hot August Night had just been released, and we listened to this music throughout the night. We played lots of games and I was having a fun time. Dowland was very involved in the games and all the students vied for his attention. All the students wanted to be his favourite and get his attention. The sleeping arrangements at the sleepover were intense and the kids slept in their own sleeping bags in the tents. I was in a tent with some other boys, but I can't recall how many or who they were. During the night, I woke to find Dowland lying beside me with his hand inside my pyjama pants, fondling my genitals. When I looked at him, he stopped and said to me in a low voice, "You are having a bad dream. Go back to sleep." He gave me a little shake as if to reassure me everything was all right and then left. At one time, Dowland was my physical education teacher. He was quite rigorous with his lessons and on one occasion made me run until I was physically sick. I sat down on a bench seat and Dowland sent the rest of the class off on another run around the Dowland then came to me and stood behind me with one hand on my shoulder and the other on my stomach. He began rubbing my stomach up and down to ease my pain. Dowland then moved inside again, fondled my genitals. My penis became erect and Dowland told me that I was a good boy. This made me cry. I was very embarrassed and upset by what he was doing. I was also concerned that some of the other students would see as the other moved his hands from my shorts. At the completion of the physical education lessons, Dowlands would all that we all had a shower. The showers consisted of a wall with 4 shower heads. All of the boys were stripped naked, even the ones who could not shower because all the showers were occupied. Dowland would stand amongst the boys looking at us all. The last time Dowland abused me was in the classroom. The class was full of students and he sent me to the back of the classroom during class, to a place where all the boys' jackets were hung on the wall. After a time, Dowland came to where I was. We were behind the other students and they could only have been able to see us if they turned around. Of course, no one turned around because they would be sent to stand there too. He cupped my face in his hands, then slapped me across the face hard enough to make me cry. Once I was upset, he comforted me by cupping my face in his hands again and started thrusting his hips towards me as he was whispering to me. I can't recall what he said, but I said to him, "This is not fair. I can't fight back." He just stopped and let go. That was the last time Dallin tried to touch me. The kids at St Pat's used to snigger about Dallin's behaviour and say things like, "He's touching the kids again." There were particular boys at school who were given more attention by Dallin. There were only 2 boys in my class that I never saw being sent to the back of the classroom. I remember many boys returned to their desks crying after being at the back of the classroom with Dallin. Everyone in the class knew what was going on, but it was never discussed. We used to say, that's Dallin, "He's got him again, he's got him again, he's touching him again." It was common knowledge among the students in my year that Dallin was abusing many of the boys at the school. The boys that Dallin seemed to particularly favour were generally boys who were not as strong or mature as some of the other boys in our grade. I find it inconceivable that none of the brothers, lay teachers, the nurse, or even some of the parents knew about the abuse by Dallin. It was just so blatantly obvious, and every boy in the class knew their turn was going to come up at some stage. Around late 1974, when I was 12 or 13 years old, I went to Eureka Swimming Pool in Ballarat with 2 of my friends. Both of my friends went to St Alipius Primary School and then on to St Patrick's. We were in the changing room when Father George Pell walked in. Father Pell was an old St Patrick's boy. He used to say Mass there occasionally. Pell was a big, imposing figure. He strutted around the college when he was there as if he was superior to everyone else. Because of that, I just assumed he was superior. I don't think Father Pell would have known our names, but he would have known that we were students from St Patrick's. He would have known my 2 friends from St Alipius and knew me from Villa Maria. In fact, I was the student that thanked him on behalf of the school community for his attendance at a school function on one occasion. Father Pell came into the change rooms and said something like, "G'day boys," and went and stood behind us and started getting changed. Then I just said something like, "We've got to do something about what's going on at St Pat's." And Father Pell said, "Yes, what do you mean?" And I said, "Brother Dowling is touching little boys." Father Pell said, "Don't be so ridiculous," and walked out. Father Pell didn't ask any questions. He didn't ask, "What do you mean?" or "How could you say that?" He just dismissed it and walked out. His reaction gave me the impression that he knew about Brother Dowling but couldn't or wouldn't do anything about it. My 2 friends never said a word while I was talking with Father Pell, although they did nod in agreement. I believe that they were aware of similar things happening at St Alipius with Brother Best. One of these friends later committed suicide by blowing himself up in his car overlooking St Alipius. I only found this out when I went back to Ballarat for work. I didn't do anything more after I spoke to Father Pell, which is really unfortunate, and I felt a bit guilty about it. People say I was a 12-year-old boy then and I couldn't have done much more anyway. I probably could have, although it would have been at the risk of exposing my own abuse, and I couldn't do that. I was too embarrassed, humiliated, ashamed by it to talk about it. I don't remember why I told Father Pell about Brother Dowling. I still don't know where I got the courage to say it, because my biggest fear was exposing myself. There was this boy who was 1 year younger than me from St Joseph's Home, an orphanage run by the Sisters of Nazareth. It was always referred to as Nazareth House, and it was in Sebastopol, south of Ballarat. I used to put him on my handlebars of the bike and ride him to the bus stop. For some reason, I really liked this kid. I don't even know his name, but I was really scared that he was going to be abused. I recognised that he was the vulnerable and the type of boy who would be targeted by someone like Dowling. Maybe this is why I went and told Father Pell. At the end of 1974, Brother Dowling told us that he was going to be our under-14 football coach the following year. When we came to the school at the start of 75, Dowling was gone. A different brother coached us that year. No one told us why Brother Dowling had left or where he had gone. The school headmaster, Brother Nangle, also left around that time. While I was at St Patrick's, there was a rumour that all Form 1C went to see Brother Nangle and put in a complaint against Brother Dowling, and then they were all in detention. I don't know whether that happened or not, but I think if Brother Nangle didn't know what was going on with Dowland, there was something wrong. Brother O'Halloran became the acting headmaster after Brother Nangle left. In 1975, I was having an argument with my mother when I said in anger Dowland was touching boys. I never told her I was a victim, but I did tell her that he had been touching other boys at St Pat's. My mum didn't believe Dowland would do such a thing because he was a Christian brother. She told me never to say those things again. Years later, my mum saw Brother Dowland's conviction on the news. She rang me and apologised. I didn't tell anyone else about my abuse by Brother Dowland until I was around 40 years old. I spoke with an employee of mine who I had befriended. He had a girlfriend who had been raped and he knew the symptoms. He asked me what was wrong and I ended up telling him I was abused, but I never mentioned Dowland. I didn't tell anyone else. In fact, I denied the abuse if asked until I reported the matter to the police in April 2014. About 2002, I read an article which said that Archbishop Pell had denied something. I can't remember what he denied, but I remember thinking, you just can't keep denying it. I went straight to the journalist Peter Ellingson at the Age newspaper and told him about my conversation with Father Pell. I also told Mr. Ellingson some personal stuff about how I felt and how I'd lived my life, although I didn't tell him what had happened to me. I told him about my friend who had committed suicide and that I believed it was because he had been sexually abused. After this article was published, Archbishop Pell is quoted as saying, "At a distance of 28 years, I have no recollection of any such conversation. If I was approached and thought the stories plausible, I would have informed the Christian brothers." Essentially, Pell denied that I had told him about Dowland and denied any knowledge of sexual abuse in Ballarat. In July 2011, Broken Rights contacted me and asked if I was the boy that spoke to the journalist Mr. Ellingson. I said yes. In 2013, Broken Rights contacted me again and asked if I could give my details to another journalist, David Marr. David Marr interviewed me and included my story in his article for the Quarterly Essay. The article was titled "The Prince, Faith..."
To tell you about now, at 8:02, crooks hit a medical marijuana.
I would be prepared to have my name in the article. I felt I could trust Marr and decided to put my name to it to add credibility. After this article was published, Archbishop Pell again denied that I had told him about Brother Dowland. Pell stated, "A predictive and selective rehash of old material. G.K. Chesterton said, 'A good novel tells us the truth about its hero. A bad novel tells us the truth about its author.' Marr has no idea what motivates a believing Christian." One of the police investigating the original complaints against Dowland was Paul Jolly. He was a student at St Pat's with me in the 1970s and I played football with him, so I've known Paul for a while. I think he always suspected I was a victim, but when he asked me, I absolutely denied it. He later told me of the police investigation into sexual abuse in Ballarat and the possible link to many suicides. In February 2014, I approached Victoria Police and reported the abuse by Dowland. I provided a signed statement and told the police I was willing to give evidence in court against Dowland. The matter became part of Task Force Say No and Dowland was charged with his abuse of me. There were numerous victims who had proceeded against Dowland and he was facing a large number of charges. I know there was some plea bargaining in relation to Dowland pleading guilty to some charges if others were dropped. Ultimately, Dowland pleaded guilty to my charges and I was not required to give evidence. I provided a victim impact statement, but I was still uncomfortable about being identified as an abuse victim. I was still feeling humiliated, embarrassed and guilty. My statement was read out by the prosecutor at the sentence hearing. I found the police to be very good. They were sympathetic and sensitive and they believed my story. I'm very glad I attended the sentence hearing. Listening to the other 15 or so impact statements helped give me some self-respect. For the first time in my life, I knew I wasn't alone. I recognised that I was not being oversensitive or exaggerating. I was very disappointed with the sentence that Dowland received for his abuse. 3 years in prison for abusing 20 boys and for all the trauma that he caused, not just with the victims but to their families as well, was totally inadequate. Outside the court, I spoke with the media and publicly acknowledged myself as a victim and publicly made my claims about telling George Pell. I wrote to the DPP asking that the sentence be reviewed and, if deemed appropriate, an appeal against the leniency be lodged. When I was at St Patrick's, I was one of the more intelligent students in the class. I certainly didn't utilise this intelligence because I started to become progressively withdrawn from everything when I was about 15 years old. I did not concentrate on my schooling or care about learning. I was school captain at Villa Maria, if not in name, certainly by the expectation of being a leader. The abuse caused me to withdraw into myself. I've attempted suicide on a few occasions, but I'm not sure whether they were serious attempts or if I was attention-seeking, or if it was a cry for help. I drank bleach once. Even when I was at St Patrick's, I started self-abusing and I started cutting my arms. I don't know why I did that. It was out of character, and I only did it a couple of times. Guilt and humiliation have always been my overriding emotions. Knowing about all the abuse that took place in Ballarat makes me feel totally ashamed and abjectly guilty. I have tried to cope with this all my life, but by the time I reached 40, it was beginning to consume me. I felt guilty about not doing more than what I did. I've heard through the media and police that there could be as many as 40 to 50 suicides in Ballarat alone that are related to child sexual abuse. I was Catholic, and I think the Catholic Church is founded on guilt, so it's probably the biggest thing for me. If something happens to you, you are guilty because of what happened to you. You are guilty because you were complicit in it, even though you had no control over it. I don't have any male friends. I get hypervigilant when males are around, and I'm not good with relationships. As a personal trainer, I train young guys, but I would not go out and socialise with them. When I used to go to a gym, I stood in the back corner and used to look around for potential threats. After about an hour of watching and realising there were no threats there, I could move on the gym floor. I don't feel comfortable out working in a male environment in the gym. I use work to socialise and escape. If I don't, I wouldn't speak to anyone. I rarely go out. I can't go outside. I don't do any of the typical masculine things. It's almost as if I have taken every male trait in my life and gotten rid of it. I don't talk about cars, I don't talk about sport. If I had to go to the supermarket, I used to take my daughter with me, and she was only 7 or 8 years old then. She was a bit of security for me. She could tell when I was going to have a panic attack, and she would get me out back to the house, I should say. If someone else takes me out to a place that I'm unfamiliar with, I can't cope and I can't talk to people. I don't like new situations or meeting new people. The abuse has affected my relationship with my ex-wife and my kids. I became so withdrawn I couldn't do anything. I can't go outside. I can't socialise with people. Alcohol is a big part of my life. I drink to escape, but I know that it doesn't control my life. I deliberately stayed away from drugs because I knew I could become very easily addicted. I class myself as a victim. I can't get my head around not being a victim, even though psychologists or psychiatrists that I've spoken to say that I'm a survivor. But I didn't survive what happened. 5 or 6 years ago, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. I cry over anything, whether it be a happy or a sad occasion. I will even cry if someone is randomly nice to me. I cry pretty much every day, and the scar of what happened to me just stays there. Previously, I was not interested in seeking compensation. I don't believe it would help me. I used to think professional help rather than monetary compensation would be more beneficial. I've seen a few psychologists and psychiatrists over the course of the years. It hasn't worked for me so far. I have not seemed to find anyone I could relate to. But I've changed my opinion on compensation. After being at the court matter for Dowling and hearing the stories of the other victims, I am aware that we are all having to endure hardships and the fallout from the abuse. At least compensation could help provide victims with the things in life that they have missed out on by not being able to follow their dreams and career goals. I also think it may encourage others to come forward and seek help. I am happy that there is research being conducted into the long-term effects of male childhood sexual abuse. The symptoms victims suffer are finally being recognised as real. For me, those symptoms include fear, helplessness, isolation, self-blame or guilt, shame and humiliation, masculinity issues, anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, substance abuse, and loss of confidence in my manhood. The first time I told my mother about the abuses in 2012 or 2013, I was at home arguing with her. She asked if I was abused while I was at school, and in anger I said yes. I gave her no details of the abuse, but did confirm that I had been a victim. She knew it was Dowling because of his conversations. I know that she has a lot of guilt about this. Since the article by David, my mother no longer considers herself a Catholic. Previously, she would donate to the church and attend weekly mass. She no longer does either of these things. I don't often get to Ballarat, but I did go in 2009 and 2010. I ran into a guy I went to school with and who I hadn't seen since I left St Patrick's. He told me he had been abused by Brother Dowling, and he was one of the first to make a complaint to police which resulted in charges against Dowling. He spoke as if the abuse happened yesterday. I started to think that's really, really bad, because I always just believed that it happened to me and didn't happen to anyone else. But I have now realised that there must be a lot of hurting people out there in their 50s. I made a few phone calls to people I'd been to school with and tried to get together as much information as I could. Most of the people I spoke to said they didn't want to do anything about it. They said things like, it's a long time ago, don't worry about it. I rang the Ballarat Courier and asked, has anyone done any stories on this? I really think there should be some sort of peer group support organisation happening. I was put through to a journalist. She asked what years I was at St Pat's, and she started telling me about how many people she knew who had been abused in those years. Everywhere I went in Ballarat on that trip, people were telling me stories about being abused by Christian brothers. It's still so raw and the impact is still so great. I believe there's a huge story to be told in Ballarat. There are people who are really hurting here. There are some older men that will be suicidal. What I want from the Royal Commission is for their stories to be told. Ballarat was a town of 60,000 people. There's a lot of people there and a lot of people involved. I reckon there were probably 100 kids in my year at St Pat's, and around 80% of them were abused in some form or other. I know what happened to me has affected my life, and I have underachieved my whole life. It will affect generations of people like that. There has not been a day since 1973 that I haven't thought about what Dowling did to me. Having the reaction I had from both Father Pell and Mum made me hesitate to come forward sooner, as I felt no one would believe me. As I got older, I was too embarrassed and ashamed. I have been having counselling over a period of time, and I am of the opinion that since the parliamentary inquiry and the commencement of this Royal Commission, I will be believed.
Does anyone else have any questions? Mr Gray, I should tell you that I would anticipate we'll be asked to make findings about some of the matters that Mr Green has included in his statement. It's a matter for you and those instructing you, but I should put you on notice that that's a real possibility.
Mr Honour, I better lift this up, I think.
I'm sorry?
I think I better lift this up so I can be heard. Thank you, Your Honour. My clients have taken the position that I advised yesterday in the knowledge of the way the Royal Commission...
well, I understand that, but I want to make clear to you that although we normally don't make findings as to whether or not someone was abused, in relation to the allegation that Mr Green makes in relation to Cardinal Pell, which of course goes to the Church's response to allegations, it's in a wholly different category.
Yes.
And I just think it's necessary that you understand and those instructing you understand that I anticipate that we'll be asked to make findings about what he has to say.
Yes.
Now, all I need to say beyond that is, do you still not wish to ask him any questions?
I don't wish to ask him any questions. As Your Honour knows and the Commission knows, the Cardinal has not been asked to put on a statement in this matter. He undoubtedly will do so if he's asked to,
Well, Mr Gray, you can anticipate that he will be asked to.
Yes, we do anticipate that, Your Honour, and when that happens, he will certainly do so.
Well, yes, but that doesn't take away from the point that I seek to make to you. Now is the chance you have to ask Mr Green questions if it is to be put to him that his recollection is not correct.
Your Honour, we will not be putting to Mr Green that he is not to be believed, which is the matter discussed or covered in the practice guideline. Cardinal Pell, as Mr Green has already noted in his statement, has a different recollection. Mr Green has acknowledged that, and that no doubt will be what the Cardinal says.
Well, the position is clear.
Yes, Your Honour.
It's a matter for you and those instructing you.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Yes. Mr Green, thank you for your evidence. I need to tell you you're excused too.
Your Honour, perhaps the lunch.
We'll take lunch.